Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. I'm Joe. In this video, we will be taking a first look at the game France 40. This is the second edition. This is a game, of course, from GMT Games and is designed by Mark Simonitch. This is the second edition, as I already mentioned. So this is a game that was out, and it's got updated cover art and an available mounted map, which I did purchase and I do have. So we're going to take a look at this particular game. So let's flip her over and take a look at the back, right? So now this does contain two games. One is called Sickle Cut and one is called Dynamo. They use the same rule set and they share many pieces, but each has a separate map. So we'll see the map here in a little bit, of course, or the maps rather. So, this is as part of the 4X series, and there are a bunch of entries in there. I probably could name them all if I wanted to take the time, but we'll just assume that you are familiar at least with the series. The most recent release before this one was North Africa 41, and there is an expansion, North Africa 40, that is on P500 right now on the GMT Games website if you're interested in checking that out. But this game, two games as I said, so you have Sickle Cut, which is Guderian's drive to the channel, and this is basically what I just read, the drive by Guderian. This was in May of 40. The German army broke the French line on the Meuse and raced to the English Channel near Abbeville. And the game starts on May 13th, which was the third day of Case Yellow. Case Yellow, of course, was the invasion of France and the Low Countries. And the other one is Dynamo Retreat to Victory, which seems counterintuitive if you listen to the words retreat to victory. But that, of course, would cover the British withdrawal to Dunkirk, where they were able to extract the BEF. As most of us obviously know, they basically saved their army from destruction or surrender and brought it home, where it was able to carry on the fight in North Africa and other places as the war progressed. Those are the two games, so you can see the units. These are familiar if you've played any of the 4X games. The layout of the counters is consistent. This particular box includes two paper maps, which would be one for, of course, Sickle Cut and one for Dynamo. It's got two counter sheets, one rule book, one playbook, two setup and reinforcement cards, two identical CRT TEC, so combat results table and terrain effects chart for those of you who may be a little newer to wargaming, and two six-sided dice. The complexity shows as a 5 and the solitaire suitability also shows as a 5. This is a two-player game, 4 to 6 hours, and ages 14 and up. So as you can see, this is 2024 game. Now here on the side, if you're unfamiliar with how GMT does their stuff, this being a second edition, the number 1318, originally the game was released in 2013 as the 18th game they released that year. The -24 means that this is a printing that took place in 2024. Really straightforward. All right, so let's open up the box and take a look at what's inside. All right, let's open it up and see what we got. All right, the ever popular bag of baggies, and I say that, but I store my pieces in these usually, so they are very useful, and I am appreciative of GMT including them. Two dice, 2d6, one black, one blue, so likely Germans and French or allies. Could be Britain, of course, depending on the game. So here are our rules of play. Looks like about 24 pages. So let's take a look and see what's inside. Introduction. So an introduction, a list of the abbreviations. Most of these are probably somewhat familiar, from the series. So EZOC, of course, is an enemy zone of control. This game will likely include the basic kind of mechanic of the 4X series. Kind of one of the things it's famous for is the way the zones of control work. So we'll see that here in a bit. Inventory of what's in the box, so you can confirm that you received everything you should have. Then you have your counters here. the description of what everything means. So, for example, a box around the edge indicates that the unit has no zone of control. This being a headquarters unit, that's not overly surprising. You flip HQs to their backside when used, or to move them more than 2 hexes. You'll have hexes with setup hex numbers on them, so you know where to place them at the start of the scenarios. And different things. I won't go overly go overly much into detail. Sorry, tongue tripping here. Stacking points, troop quality, unit ID, etc. Your unit size. This is basic stuff. Again, if you're a war gamer, all of this is fairly familiar, I'm sure. And then, of course, our NATO symbology. There is a tank on the tank units. You can see this one here has a tank on it. It is a heavy tank. An attack strength in a yellow box indicates the unit is a heavy tank unit. This one is a regular tank unit. You can see it's got an 8 for its attack strength, but it is not in a yellow box. The unit colors. So you've got the British in khaki, the Belgians in green, the French in blue. The colonial French troops are in dark blue. And in the German side, you've got the Wehrmacht in gray, the Waffen-SS in black, the Luftwaffe in blue-gray, and the Dutch in orange. Of course, the Dutch are part of the Allied forces. Steps, you'll have 1, 2, or 3-step units. 2-step units have a front and back. 3 steps are indicated with a thin stripe across the reverse side of their counter. When a 3-step unit takes a second step loss, it's replaced with a remnant of the appropriate type. So you can see it says RAM up the top, and so on. This is all familiar if you've played 4X games before. This is like dead solid stuff that's included in the system. Sequence of play. You have your initial phase, movement. This is Germans, right? So you have a German player turn, their first phase. Their initial phase is where you do your flip your air units to being ready. You place your reinforcements in their entry hexes. Then you'll move, combat, recovery, supply, and then the GQG phase in the sickle cut scenario only. When I play, we'll talk about that. So we can ignore that for now. Just be aware that there's a special phase in the sickle cut scenario. Allied player turn, same thing basically, same thing except for this. And then your end phase. And then for the Dynamo scenario, see the expanded sequence of play inside the player aid card. So we'll see that later. Stacking rules, zones of control. Okay, like the Zoc bond system is a thing that is present in these games, and it's kind of a staple of the system. So this just explains, that explains zones of control. The Zoc bonds are explained in number 6, how to form a Zoc bond, and then you get an example here, right? So you have enemy units with a space in between. That's the Zoc bond. Very straightforward, works really well, and it is, like I said, a staple of this system. And just kind of different cases of how Zoc bonds impact the game. Then our movement rules. So you have extended movement as well as tactical movement. And again, once we get into gameplay, that's another thing. Again, this all fits the system. So if you've played 4X games, you'll be familiar with most of this stuff. Terrain effects on movement, allied rail movement, so on and so forth. Combat rules. Multi-hex, the procedure for combat, minimum and maximum for how strong your attacks can be, basically. Anything above 40 strength points in an attack is ignored. And the defense factors, again, can use a maximum of 20 strength points. Anything in excess of that is ignored. And these both apply before... attack applies before halving, and halving is something that will, it's right here. It's explained in modifiers. But you can either halve or double based on various factors. You get a tank shift, and so on. So I won't go, like I said, overly much into that. We'll save that for the gameplay. But we have combat modifiers, including tank shift, halving, and doubling. The effect of allied heavy tanks, air units, and their support. The HQ's impact on combat, as well as tank unit troop quality, rather. the effect of terrain such as rivers, restricted hexes, etc. And then combat results, what happens after combat. How do you determine what steps are removed? How do you indicate step losses and remnants? Like we saw briefly before, you have these remnant units here with the stripe that says rem, because that was originally a 3-step unit, took 2-step losses, so it becomes a quote-unquote remnant. Then determined defense and what that means. So you have determined defense, you also have desperate defense, and how those work. Again, all of this stuff are things that are in the 4X games in general. The system, Mark tweaks it from game to game, but it is basically the same basic system throughout. Retreats, how do you stop a retreat? Disruption and recovery, what effects do you have when you're disrupted? The recovery phase, effects of a full retreat. Advance after combat, where you can advance, how the EZOCs and ZOC bonds work with that, breakthrough combat, fortifications, including the Maginot Line, Allied HQ, supply and isolation and attrition due to those, reinforcement rules, your out of supply penalties, of course, are in there as well, German reinforcements, entry hexes, and special rules that are common to all scenarios, Rommel and Montgomery. Obviously, those are two pretty big names from the Second World War. So there's a Rommel. He's considered to be with the Panzer Regiment of the 7th Panzer Division at all times, and so he has an impact there. Montgomery, if his unit is in good order and participating in the defense, then the Allied players allowed 1 reroll of the CRT, or for the CRT die roll, and 1 reroll of a determined defense dice roll if one occurs. So those are the advantages that these two capable commanders give you. And you have your sickle cut scenario, and it walks through the special rules, your setup, and then special rules as including the GQG, which is Grand Quartier General, markers to place on Allied units in an attempt to slow them down and to prevent them from attacking. German mass airstrike. Then your Dynamo scenario and the things that are specific to that, including the victory conditions, of course. Summary of all the special units. So you can see you've got Rommel, de Gaulle, Montgomery, the reconnaissance unit, heavy tanks, air units, and Allied HQs. Counter abbreviations. So you've got Großdeutschland, the Bergs, which are mountain troops, of course, and so on through here. The Belgians, the French, and the British. And then our credits. And that is the end of the book with an index on the back. So that's our rule book. Here's the playbook. So playbook for both. And what's in here? Well, you get an example of play, which is extremely useful. If you're new to the system or unclear on something, going through this will do wonders for your comprehension. Some notes on the 1st edition and 2nd edition. Order of battle notes, situation maps. These are pretty cool. You can see some of the German Lager West map for May 15th, Sickle Cut Turn 3. So you can see all the unit denotations, where the front was, etc. It's really, really interesting stuff in here. And then you've got the France 40 combined game where you can actually play both. And the Dynamo map overlays the north part of the Sickle Cut map by about 10 hexes. And you move from Sickle Cut to Dynamo, of course. And then here's setup for that, and some design notes that continue on the back for the combined game. Now, as is also the case oftentimes with the 4X series, you have setup, German at start, or setup and reinforcement cards. Basically, it tells you what units you should have, where they go. Army Group B is these guys. The 15th Motorized Corps and the Hoth are these guys. Guderian's 19th Motorized is here, etc. And then reinforcements, turn 1, 2, 3, etc., and so on. And then here for Dynamo, you get the same thing. Panzer Group Kleist and Army Group B and reinforcements, right? Pretty standard stuff there. Here is the Allied one for Sickle Cut. The French 1st, the French 9th, the French 2nd, their reserves. Allied random reinforcements that you place in an opaque cup. We have some British in here as well. On the other side, you have Dynamo, which is going to be, of course, the BEF plus the French First Army and the Belgian Army. And then we have two identical player aid cards, as we saw when we went through the list of components. So these are the same. So you have your CRT and your determined defense and modifiers on the front. On the inside, we have the rally table, isolated attrition, disengagement, extended movement, breakthrough, evacuation for Dynamo. So this is the evacuation from Dunkirk. And then we have our extended sequence of play. And on the back, as you would expect, because we haven't seen it yet, the terrain effects chart. So, you know, that's pretty typical for most war games. Your movement points, whether or not you use the armor shift, effects on combat, and any notes that maybe are needed to explain it a little bit more in depth. We do have two counter sheets here. So going by our color scheme, we know these guys are the Germans and these are the French. And you can see the units. We'll take a closer look here at some armor. You can see we've got silhouettes of tanks on here on the German side, right? And over here we have the French. And you can see some silhouettes as well on here. As usual, this is GMT. Their components are very nice. The artwork is very well done. Of course, these are two-sided counters. So you have a reduced side. You can see some of these here with, I guess actually we don't have any three-step units on this sheet, but we do have some here, and you can see the remnants. These are remnant units. Here, of course, would be SS, more Germans, some markers, some aircraft, the British, the Belgians, the Dutch. There's not much in the way of Dutch forces here, and so on, and then some markers for disruption and out of supply. And of course, full retreat and completely out of supply, and so on and so on, right? So pretty straightforward stuff. Now, the maps, I'm going to show you the mounted maps because I bought them and they're nice. So the paper maps would be identical to this. So this is the package they come in. It's a Ziploc bag. It is a two-sided map, as you might expect. It's easier that way than to print two complete maps. I'm gonna have to adjust my shot here, so give me a moment to do that. This is a sizable map, so rather than you know, zoom all the way out to show the entirety, I'll just move it around so we can see what's on here. This is the Sickle Cut map. This is the upper right side corner. You can see here Namur, Charleroi, Sedan down here. We do have the Maginot line through here as well, etc. Right? So this is, you know, your typical mounted GMT board. It's very nice. It actually laid out very surprisingly flat, so that's good to know. Oftentimes the seams want to, you know, bow up. They don't lay flat perfectly out of the box, or in this case bag, but this one did very nicely. So let's slide it down and show some of the rest of it here. So this would be the, of course, top left side, going all the way out here to Abbeville and the English Channel. And here's Amiens. If we slide up, you can see here's our bottom right corner. You've got Sickle Cut, Guderian's drive to the Channel. There's a nice terrain chart here of what the terrain represents. Then, of course, your turn record track, which also includes some indications of when reinforcements show up. And yeah, so this is, of course, one map. Now we'll flip it over and take a look at the other map. We'll start here in the upper left. So the North Sea and the Strait of Dover is right here. Here, of course, is Dunkirk. And you can see that this is obviously north of where we were before. Abbeville is at the bottom of this map. I'll show you that in a second. But you've got a box here for your evacuated units. Of course, our turn record track. Of course, our terrain chart here. at least to be able to identify your terrain. Your evacuation table, which is also on the player aid card, is here on the map as well. German and RAF air units, and so on. You've got a box for British remnants, evac markers, and halt markers. Down here, as I mentioned, you can see Abbeville is right at the very bottom of the map. And then, of course, if we go to the left side, you can see that we have the Netherlands are up here. Here's Antwerp. Here's Brussels. And so you have, the Netherlands and Belgium, of course. And then just kind of moving in the direction of Dunkirk. And then down here, you can see where some of this map, obviously, also, as we saw with Abbeville, it overlaps. Namur and Charleroi are both on the Sickle Cut map as well. So you have two maps. Now, if you were going to play the combined game, you would, of course, need to use the paper maps because this is the same map board, and you would not be able to kind of flip it over. Although you could move the units, you could play one side, I guess, and move the units up. So if you played Sickle Cut, which, of course, comes first in terms of chronology, play that out and then move all your units to here. But if you did want to have one giant map, you would have to use the paper maps. So that will do it for this video. So again, this is France 40 from GMT Games. This is the second edition. This is a Mark Simonitch design. So here is the card for it. As you can see, double-sided mounted map for France 40. So I appreciate, as always, you guys watching. Hopefully you found this useful. And, please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing if you're not a subscriber. That would be awesome and greatly appreciated. But either way, hopefully you'll return and check out future entries here on the channel. That's going to do it. My name's Joe. This is the Hexed Encounter channel. And until next time, as always, happy gaming.